Alright guys, this one will be the last tutorial about the drums, and we will talk about the mixing process. First of all, some tips at the beginning. I usually prefer to export my programmed drums as an audio file instead of leaving the FPC in my FL Studio project. That's easily because if you have so many samples loaded in the FPC, your CPU usage can get pretty high, especially when you're mixing longer songs and stuff, and therefore I'll just export it as audio and import it into the playlist. So first we want to take a look at the kick drum and how to get a nice sound. Okay, I'm using just a drum track from my latest cover, and as you can see we have the kick drum here. We will put it onto our mixer. I usually put the kick drum as the first track, but that's just up to you where you put it, and we can listen to it quickly. And as you can hear, you can also hear some cymbals and the snare in the background. That's easily because I like to have some bleed in my drum tracks as well. That means, as in a real recording, you also have other parts of the drum kit ringing in the background, and so I usually just put the kick drum at a high volume and the other parts of the drum kit I leave at very low volume, so it's barely hearable, but as you can hear, it rings out in the background. So we have linked it to our mixer, and now we're taking a look at all the plugins I use. Therefore I just open a preset I've created, and alright, basically for every drum part we have, there are pretty much two important plugins. One would be an EQ, maybe two, and maybe even more necessary would be a compressor. That's basically the most important thing. Alright, we start with the EQs though. So what we have here, I have a free band EQ here. It's a free one. I'll probably put it into the description because it's a pretty good one and easy to use. And what's basically going on here is some pre-EQing some of the important parts of your sound spectrum. And what I do here is to bring up the low frequencies, of course, for the bass drum at first, just to have a bigger sound, and some of the mid frequencies a bit, and the high ones. It's basically just a PEQ and nothing special. You really don't have to use it on your stuff importantly, but for me it worked out that way. Probably you would only need a low EQ to give it the right low end here. I also put a high pass frequency here at 30 Hz, because under 30 Hz there is pretty much not much going on for your ears. So that's basically it for this little EQ. Maybe later on I will talk about some free plugins and stuff if you want to, that are good ones. Just let me know if you want to have another video on that. But for now we will take another look at the next EQ. And here it gets a bit more important. So what you want to do with the bass drum, you want to have one low frequency that's peaking out. Normally it's between 50 and 80 hertz, maybe up to 100 hertz. It really depends on the sound you want to achieve. But for me it worked out to be something around 70 and 80 hertz to be perfect. So you want to have a little peak here in that area, of course. For me it's basically up to 6 dB or so, but definitely not more, and depending on your samples and how good they are, it also could be less. Okay, the second band here, it's about 210 hertz, and as we will see later on with the snare, there will be the main spot for our snare, so we want to lower that band on the bass drum, of course, so we can hear the snare later on better. So you can see here is a really big dip in here, like minus 12 dB, so it can be pretty crucial here, so keep that in mind. So the next two peaks here and that one little dip around 1200 hertz, it's basically, for my sample, it's tend to work out to give it a more natural sound. So there you have pretty much some personal preference going on, so you have to try out and see how your samples responds to these frequency band between 500 and maybe 2000 hertz. Some samples really need some dips on the 2000 hertz area and some don't, and yeah, there you have to play around a bit. The next frequency is about 5000 hertz, and what it basically does, it gives you that presence you need in the mix, so you can play around with that as well. So we take a listen quickly how that sounds with the EQs on. As you can hear, if you put that presence area up, you get that clicking sound. Sometimes it's cool for the mix, sometimes don't. There you have to see. But as you could hear, it already sounds a bit low and richer. So next up would be the compressors. And as you can see, there are also two of them here. First one is just the built-in compressor from FL Studio, and basically this would be the usual kick drum compression settings you'll see on many other videos as well. So you have a pretty high threshold at minus 27 dB, depends on the input volume of your sample, of course, and more importantly would be the ratio, and here you can be pretty high with the ratio. I keep it at 7:1, pretty much a fast attack and pretty much a short release, so you get the compressor to kick in very early, so you get the right punch out of your kick drum. Alright, that's pretty much all about the first compressor, not much happening here. For the second one, I used a supercharger from Native Instruments. That one was free, or still is free, I don't know. And I pretty much used the Fat Kick preset out of there. And yeah, of course you want to have the punch knob turned on, obviously. And the third one is pretty much to add some saturation. That's all about it. And you also put, or rather I put a rather high ratio again, and for the input you just trim your input so it gets into the compression range. I also put the output a bit lower, so for the next plugin the volume is pretty nice. Okay, we will try to listen to it once more. And as you can hear, we already have the nice punchy sound of a kick drum as you would like to have it. Okay, next plugin is pretty much just a limiter, and what it does we will see. Yeah, what it basically does, it puts up the volume how I want it to be in the mix. As you can see, it's just another compression stage that's pretty hard, so you get the right volume over the mix, and yeah, not much to say about that as well. The next plugin is a bit higher, harder to explain, and it probably will be a part of a possible next video, because it's basically some sidechain compression in FL Studio between the kick drum and the bass drum, and I will just skip it here because it really don't affects your sound. It pretty much just affects the bass, so it gets lower in volume as soon as the kick hits, but that you will see later maybe. The last plugin is just a send plugin that's sending my signal to the first send channel here, and later on we can add some reverb to the kick and all the other parts of your drum kit. Okay, next part of your drum kit we're taking a look at is the snare, and again, same procedure as with the kick drum. We export it as audio and load it in. And like with the kick, we have some bleed going on here as well. So if you listen to it, you can hear the other parts in the background. So again, load in the preset. And it looks pretty similar to the bass drum setup. So I will going through it more quickly and keeping my eye on the new plugins more focused. So as we already saw in the kick drum, we have the peak for our snare at around 210 Hertz, and that's why there is a peak here. The second important frequency is basically the 2K area. There the sound of the snare tends to be a bit awkward, so you should listen there closely and taming that frequency range precisely. As with the other frequencies here, you want to use your ears and decide for your sample how it sounds best. Of course, you have some high pass filter going on. Everything below 50 Hz or maybe even more won't affect your snare sound too much. I usually tend to play around with the 100 Hz area as well, to either lower the low frequencies if the snare sounds too boomy, or to bring it up if I want to have a real fat snare. Alright, next up is the second EQ here. That's basically to shapen your sound a bit more, and basically it's also some sort of own personal preference stuff going on. at the mid area here. You may want to boost it if it's not sticking out of your mix too much, but that's also something you have to decide when all the other instruments are playing, so that will probably be in some of the last steps in your mixing. Okay, next up is the supercharger again, and here we have some high compression going on as well as with the kick drum, and the punch knob and the dirt knob are turned on as well. Basically then there's not much to say about it, but we will take a first listen. First with only the EQ turned on and see how that sounds. So with the EQ it already has some more presence, and now with the compressor turned on, it already got louder and more punchy. So last, not really the last step, but close to it, we have the limiter again to set our final volume and maybe get some peaks out of the way that the compressor didn't handle. So another listen. So it's basically just to get the right volume. Yeah, pretty much. So the last plugin is another nice plugin I maybe will talk about later more, but for now it's basically a saturation plugin from Softtube. It's called the saturation knob, and it was or still is free, I don't know. And yeah, it basically is just easy saturation. Turn up the knob and you get more saturation, turn it down, you get less. So there's not much you can do wrong, just use your ears and listen in. So you can hear it gets more aggressive, and later on in the mix you will hear it more clearly how that plugin makes your sound more sticking out, and yeah, it works pretty good. So you should definitely get this plugin because it's also very helpful for other instruments, so keep that in mind. Last plugin is just again the send for the reverb later on. Okay, next up is or are the toms, and here we can go through pretty quickly because they are very similar to the other two parts of your drum kit. I will maybe we play it without the plugins first. So yeah, it's with the plugins. Again, we have some EQs. Basically, you cut out the frequencies where the other parts play. So at 210, 75, and for the other EQ, you use your ears to tame your sound a bit more. Here we have the supercharger plugin again, pretty high ratio, dirt knob, punch knob, everything. So, and here we have two limiters again. For this one I like to use some transient shaping here. That's pretty much just to balance your sustain and stuff. So we can take a look at that. As you can see, it tames your volume after the initial hit, so you don't have that boominess that toms tend to have. And basically the last limiter is just to get your peaks. So that's it for the toms pretty much. Alright, the final part of your drum kit would be your hi-hats, your chinas, your crashes and all that stuff, and we're taking a closer look at them. I usually put up those parts of the drum kit into one mixer channel here, except when it gets a bit tricky with special cymbals like the ride or some splashes, then I tend to open up another mixer channel here to get these specific parts right, but usually it's just one insert here. And again, we're loading in our created audio first and listen to it without the effects. Okay, that's pretty much just some hi-hat stuff going on. And now, of course, we will link it to our mixer. And now we're turning on the effects and take a look at them. Alright, as usual, we have our compressors set up and some EQs. So nothing special pretty much, but at first we have our basic compression going on. Pretty much nothing too cool about that. Just some basic compression to get the initial peaks controlled. The second one is just another free band EQ, which is nothing special as well, just some cutting out the low frequencies you don't need. And yeah, the rest is pretty much personal preference how the cymbals should sound in a mix. And the next one is a pretty special plugin, and I will talk a bit more about it. It's actually a free dynamic EQ, and what it does is that you can control your EQ with a threshold pretty much. So if your frequencies get beyond a specific threshold, your EQ will work more or will reduce or boost your frequencies more or less. So we can take a look at what it does. So as you could see here, the frequencies in that area, which are quite annoying, especially in the samples I use, it's pretty depending on your samples and what your samples sound like. Some frequencies can be annoying, so you have to find these areas and try to cut them out. But of course, not every part of your cymbals is annoying that area, so you have to set your threshold and reduce only, for example, in the hi-hat here, these annoying frequencies in the hi-hat. In the crashes there could be no annoying frequencies, and there your EQ won't work that hard pretty much. So that's pretty much the trick about that plugin, that it can control your frequencies only at the spots that you want to have it work. So that's actually pretty cool free plugin that I will also put into the description, and you can play around with that, and it's pretty helpful, especially on the cymbals here. Alright, next up is another compressor to tame the peaks again that result out of the boosting and cutting out here. So yeah, but it's pretty much nothing to worry about that much. You can pretty much control it with your limiter here again, so we can take a look. Yeah, pretty much it sets the volume you want to have your cymbals to have actually. So nothing too special here. Again, the send plugin at the end, and yeah. For this episode that should be it. It's quite a long one actually. So we will part it into 2 videos actually. So we will talk about the drum bass mixing and parallel compression and sidechain compression and the reverb in the next video. So if you're interested in that, you should definitely stay tuned. So see you next time.